Hey church fam, hope you're having a great week. Just wanted to come and kind of recap some of the things that we looked at Sunday. So Sunday we jumped back into Genesis, and so Sunday we were in Genesis chapter 3, and so we looked at sin and the fall and temptation. And one of the things that we saw is that the call for our life is to not be deceived by the bait and switch of sin, because that's what sin ultimately is the temptation, the deception of it is to bait us into something. Sin promises to give us something. The problem is it can't ever deliver on what it promises. One of the things I wanted to highlight, I didn't say this at all Sunday, but it was something kind of the Lord brought to my mind afterward that I just kind of wanted to go over. So one of the things that we looked at was we need to see the truth about sin, and we need to see that Jesus is better than sin. And so we walked through those kind of two things to highlight. But I wanted to read this. This comes out of James. Because one of the things I think that we miss, or maybe this, is we see the serpent is tempting Eve and Adam. And so there's a tendency for us sometimes in our life when we're tempted or when we give into sin is this adage of, hey, the devil made me do it. Now the devil does tempt, the devil does deceive. I mean, that's what he does. But I think what James tells us is pretty telling about sin and temptation and those things. So I want to read this. This comes out of James chapter 1, verse 13. It says this: let no one say when he is tempted, I'm being tempted by God. So when we're tempted, or when we feel this temptation in our life, is I can't blame God for that. So God never tempts us into evil or tempts us into sin. He says, I can't say I'm being tempted by God. It says, for God cannot be tempted with evil, and he himself tempts no one. But he says this: but each person is tempted when he is lured and enticed by his own desires. And so we say, well, whose fault was it? Well, it was Eve's fault. I mean, it was, she gave in to her desires. Now, did the serpent tempt? No doubt. But really at the core of it is that it was her own desires that led her into this as she took of the tree of the fruit of the knowledge of good and evil. And it's the same thing for our life. He goes on to say, he says, when desire has conceived, it gives birth to sin, and when sin is fully grown, it brings forth death. And we saw that illustrated very clearly in Genesis chapter 3. Now, while the serpent comes in and tempts and does all those things, she's deceived by her own desires. Her own desires lead her into this sin, and she commits this sin, and she sins and disobeys God. And it's the same thing for our life. And I just kind of want to, for you even this week, to think about temptation, sin in our life, is that when I'm tempted and when I'm being drawn into that, to first and foremost, I can't blame God for that. I can't even blame Satan for that. Is that really ultimately at the core of it is it's my own heart and it's my own sinful desires, and it's something that I have to look within myself. I can't blame my environment. I can't blame all these things, because that later we'll see this when we go to the next thing, is Adam and Eve try to blame literally everything. And the reality is they can't blame anything except themselves. It's the same thing with sin in our life, is I have to take ownership of these things. Of temptation is ultimately my own desires and me giving into my desires, not into my obedience to God. And so I would just want you just to think about that this week. It was always heavy. And I want you to be reminded of this truth that we said at the very end, is if we're going to overcome temptation in our life, and we all, every person that's listening to this, I mean, we know what it's like to be tempted. It feels like literally everywhere you look, there's temptation, and there's things that are pulling on our senses and our desires. But to remember this truth is that Jesus is far better than any sin. That's why we looked at on Easter Sunday, Revelation 5, to look at this picture that Jesus is the all-satisfying, worthy Savior. And that the moment we recognize that, it seems like things begin to pale in comparison. I said this verse, it's actually out of Psalm 119, is this prayer that I pray often when I feel like I'm tempted is, Lord, would you turn my eyes from looking at worthless things, and would you give me life in your ways? And I feel like that's a prayer I have to pray often of, Lord, help me not to look at the things of this world, but to look to you. You are the treasure. You are the thing that I want more than anything. And so as we think about sin and temptation and all these things that we looked at Sunday, I just want to be reminded is ultimately it's when we walk after our own desires, but to know this, that it's only through Jesus that we can overcome sin. Jesus succeeded in every place that we've ever failed with temptation and sin, but he also went to the cross in order to cover our sin and to cover the things that we've done. And so our victory over temptation and sin only comes through the person of Jesus. Man, I'll pray this. I pray you take hope in that. Sometimes I think we feel so just defeated in sin. Jesus came not for us to feel defeated in it, but to be freed from it. And so I hope you feel that today. Is like the freedom comes from sin as it comes from Jesus. And so I hope you be encouraged by that. Well, look, I hope you have a great week. I hope you are encouraged by Jesus and what he's done, securing our victory over sin. I hope to see you this Sunday. This Sunday is actually going to be a little different. It's Go Day. And so everything will start off at 9:30. So I'd encourage you to come to our sanctuary at 9:30. and then we'll have our Go Day. We'll actually have mission sites all over our city, and so as we go be the church in our community. So come this Sunday. Won't be the typical format we usually do as we walk through the book of Genesis, but it's going to be an awesome day to serve and to be together as a church. So hope to see you there. See you.